Hey guys, Darren Kelly, Coach for Watchlist Pods, and welcome back to another episode of the Club Preview Series. On today's episode, we are discussing the Port Adelaide Power. Let's get into it.
All the pain.
So the Port Adelaide Power finished 2024 in a bit of a disappointment year. Finished second overall in 2024, then unfortunately didn't make it past the preliminary final, losing out to Sydney there before heading to a grand final. So where do we expect Adelaide Power to go this year? I personally have them declining this year, just with missing some key personnel like a Dan Houston that exited. That's probably going to hurt their performance quite a lot, I would have thought, and just where they're sort of heading, I don't know. They didn't really include any additional talent, so I don't see how they improve their list as such. So I do expect them to drop. How far? I would say they're probably going to be around that 6 to 10 range. So they could just be on the brink of finals, or they could just miss out. So being interesting to watch. But who did they bring in? They brought in Rory Atkins from Gold Coast and like Jack Lukosius as well. I realistically think only Jack Lukosius sort of plays out of those two particularly. I think Atkins is more of a depth player. It could surprise me, but he's not on my radar to be one that I'm watching. Lukosius is a little bit here and there. I would prefer if he played a halfback role, but I think that's going to be quite unlikely with the forward stocks at Port being quite low at the moment, especially after the news of Todd Marshall being out for the season with an Achilles injury. The other one they also traded in was Joe Richards. He's from Collingwood. I do expect him to play quite a few games for Port, but again, he is a small forward, so I'm not sure at his price. He's probably another one I'm not too keen on. For their outs, as I said, Dan Houston was traded to Collingwood, so that really hurts him. He is a two-time All-Australian, so that does hurt, and was the main distributor, so that's a big key talking point on today's episode. Who's taking that role? Besides that, they had a couple retirees in Charlie Dixon and Trent McKenzie. Now, I don't think either of those are really relevant options. Obviously, Dixon, we know, played the key forward role, so he's not really relieving a hole for anyone to replace. And Trent McKenzie wasn't even playing in the AFL side for the last year, so neither of them are ones we need to speak about. Besides that, they headed to the draft with pick 15 and picked up Joe Berry, who is a small forward who has a lot of natural talent. He's one that I will quickly discuss. Probably not the most fantasy relevant sort of rookie that we're looking at. So starting at the top, we got to start with the man of the hour. That is Zachary Butters. He is priced at 106 this year, so he did improve and did exactly what we sort of wanted him when we picked him last season. He was priced at 100. He got to 106 pretty much because he had no injury. So I really don't see any value in Butters this year. You're pretty much picking him because this is where he's going to be priced at for probably most of his career. So I'm not really looking at him. In saying that, Port do have a pretty good run to start the season. If I just read off the list here, they've got the Pies and they've got Tigers, Essendon and St Kilda, so all of those are really good matchups for midfielders particularly, before hitting the Hawks and Swans, who are a bit tougher matchups. So could get you off to a bit of a flyer. Doesn't have the early bye, so no need to worry about that at all. So it could be one that could be a bit left field. I think he's only like 4% owned at the moment, so definitely would be a bit left field, but definitely could get your season off to a flyer. So yeah, I'll move on from him pretty quickly to the one that's probably a bit more fantasy relevant because of all his injuries that he had last year, and he's priced $100 million at 97. That is Connor Rozee. He had 3 injury-affected games in 2024, which was mostly hamstring. They messed him around, tried to get him back in the side too quickly without letting it heal, and he hurt himself again. So there's 3 games that really affected his average. So if you remove those scores, he averaged 101 for the season. So that means he's about 4 points of upside just based on that alone. Is that probably enough to warrant a pick? I'm probably not, because I don't think he's going to be a keeper for the rest of the season. And the other concern for me is that he got thrown forward quite a lot throughout this season. Just I think they were just allowing the likes of Drew and Horn Francis to spend a bit more time in the midfield, which meant one of the midfielders had to go out. And obviously Rosie's probably the most naturally talented forward out of those sort of guys. So it's obvious that he's going to spend some time forward throughout the season. So causes a bit of concern for me. Probably not one I'm looking at picking, but definitely one on the watch list. If he is absolutely killing it in the off season, then I see that he could probably improve his average closer to maybe 105. I'd say is probably enough to warrant the pick. Then he's definitely pushing his name into the top 8 selection. So big watch on Connor Rosie. I got to go to the Hornet because he is very fantasy relevant this year. He is priced at 90 and currently the second highest forward rated player. He absolutely killed it. He had a breakout season last year, so he increased his average from a 68 to approximately a 90, and yeah, it could cost you over 900k. So it is a lot to pay up on the forward line, but in a line that we're already paying up for very cheap players, I'd say that you could potentially pay up for Horn Francis just to say that he's one of the stable guys. You expect he's going to be a top 6 forward for the year. I'd only really realistically have Daniel, McRae, Moore, and Smith probably in front of him. Then you've got the likes of Connor McDonald get in front of him, and Matt Kennedy, and there'll be another few other surprises here and there that may pop their head up, but he's going to be there or thereabouts in terms of that top 6, so he's probably one that we're going to pick up sooner rather than later in the season. There's really no evidence for me to say that he presents value. He obviously had the breakout season. He was spending a lot of time in the midfield. I can show you his CBAs. He averaged 54% in the CBAs. Only a couple of games where it dropped quite low. I'd actually say he's actually even overpriced with some inflated numbers, particularly when Rosie was out. I've highlighted them here. 113, 112, 80, and a 99 when Rosie was out for those 4 games. So he wouldn't have got those scores otherwise. Well, it wouldn't have been as consistent as it was. You can see he drops a lot of 60s here and there, even as low as a 49. So I don't know if I wouldn't say he's value at any point. So probably not one I'm looking at particularly, but if it comes tough, then he's definitely one that I will keep an eye on. I just see him as more of an impact player personally. I think he's just doesn't really have that gut running. He doesn't have that accumulative that skill that we're really looking for when we're looking for fantasy players to be in our team. But realistically, this really just warrants my evidence of that the player that you pick the year prior just goes absolutely ballistic. I remember I picked him in 2023 in my starting team. I had him for the first 2 games. He scored a 90 in round 1, but then he dropped a stinky 45 or something like that, so I instantly traded him out. He did exactly what I expected. He would be a sort of an 85 to a 90 sort of player. Unfortunately, went 1 year too early, so unfortunate. But we'll keep an eye on it. We'll reference back to that and see who I would have picked last year to see what happens this year. So here's one definitely you got to keep an eye on to see what happens. If he gets an increase in CBAs, then absolutely here's one that to jump on quite quickly. I'll just sort of sweep past a few of these. So John Sweet, I know I've heard his name a few times in the preseason in a few other podcasts and here and there. I personally have no interest in John Sweet. I think he's where he is at for his career. He did what we sort of expected from last year, where he was priced down at like a dirt 50, increased up to about an 80, and I see no value in that. He averaged 84 in the back half of the season. And even if you remove the games where he was 50-50 with Soldo, it didn't do much for him. I just don't see the upside in it, unfortunately. I think this is just where he's at. Unless you're going to have natural progression, then I don't see it. So, and I'm not really in this year is one thing that I'm really focusing on is I don't want to pick someone for natural progression. I did that last year with Joe Newcomb and that absolutely tore me to shreds. So I'm trying to stay away from that as best I can. In saying that, he probably can increase his average to an 85, but very minimal value in my opinion. So probably not worth starting an R2. I just don't. I think it's going to hurt you more than it is the benefit. To given that if most of us start with the main two ruckman, then that's 30 points on top of a Sweet's head, pretty consistently. So that's going to hurt quite consistently. Sorry, I keep saying that word. These next sort of blokes, I've got to sort of tie it all together because it is the halfback line. And it is the unknown of who's going to be taking this Dan Houston role. I'll start with the most expensive one, and that is Kane Farrell. Now, I think Kane Farrell is probably the most likely to take this main distributor role because he's been that sort of that backup man to Houston for probably the last 2 or 3 years, if not even longer. He's priced at 78, just over 800k. Realistically, he's had a big portion of the kick-ins for a little while. Like even last year, he had 52 kick-ins. This year, had 65. It actually had more than Houston, but that's obviously because Houston had. No, sorry, never mind. Yeah, he took more kick-ins than Houston throughout the season. So he's already got a big portion of those kick-ins. So I'm not sure if that's something that I'm expecting him to increase because Port Adelaide have been one that particularly don't like to just focus on one player having the kick-ins. They like to spread it out. You can see all through the first half of the season, it's really all over the place. Burton had a fair few early to start, and then it switched over to Houston. Then it went to, Farrell. And yeah, it kept turning back over here and there. So I'm not really expecting that the kick-ins are going to be the major factor when it comes to this selection that we're looking at in the halfback taking that Houston role. We really just want to see, okay, when they're coming out of the defensive line, who's it going through? Who's that going to be that main distributor? So fingers crossed it is the likes of a Farrell, and it's an easy selection for us all. But there's definitely a few other guys that are putting their hand up. Just a few other comments I had on here. We only really had one source of stats when Houston was out, and that was in round 24. And what ended up happening was that Farrell was subbed out in the second quarter, halfway through the second quarter. I think he had like 57% in the second quarter, but he was on 51 fantasy points. So he was up to a fly. He was probably on target for 130 if he kept going the way he was going. So definitely good signs. And particularly he had 0 kick-ins in that game. So a bit unusual. And you saw the likes of Logan Evans and Burton take a lot of the kick-ins. I do think he becomes the main distributor. It's just whether he is the sort of accumulator that then we can make the selection. Because priced at 78, you probably want it to be a 90 at a minimum, 95 ideally, to make it really a worthwhile pick, in my opinion. Anything less than that, then it's no point. You're probably getting 10 points of upside at most. But in a struggling line, could be enough, I think. But to make him, close to a keeper would be the ideal situation. Chase Burgoyne's another one I'll just quickly touch on. I don't think he's going to be the halfback. I think he's going to continue in this wing role. But he's probably another one that is evidence that a player that you were really keen on. I was really keen on him last year, but he didn't start the season properly. Like Kent held him away from the team for some reason for the first game or two, and then he absolutely went off. He increased his average from like a 50 to a 75 or even more than that. So would have been nice, but Port Adelaide are annoying when it comes to fantasy. They don't like to give us easy selections, as we know. And he also has mid status, so he's one that you have to run in the midfield. So it's even tougher. He's priced at 76. It's probably just a no for me. Another backman, Miles Bergman. Again, I see him more as an impact player. I think he's going to be that third or fourth tool back there. He's more of a lockdown player when they have that dangerous taller forward. So I just don't see how he gets too much of the pill. He doesn't take many kick-ins as it is currently, and he's never really been that sort of guy. He's taken 6 in his 4 seasons. So I don't see, unless they absolutely just go balls to the wall and just give it to him and he has 60 for the season or whatever it is, then he could be potentially valued, but still I don't see the huge amount of upside for him, unfortunately. Whereas the next guy I probably see the most value in, that is Logan Evans. He is priced at 714k. Only played the 12 games in 2024 in his rookie season. Um, when Houston went down, he really became that main kick and taker. Again, I can show you those stats here. He took 8 kick-ins, 9 kick-ins, 3, and then 2 to finish off the season. And that was with Burton in the side, so he was sort of that main guy. He took most of them. However, Burton did miss one of the games. So the thing is, when Houston was out during those games, and Farrell, there's another one to look at there, he only averaged a 65. So he did have some good scores, but he also had some really bad scores. If I show you them here, if I can find his name. Where are you, Evans? There you are. So he scored a 93, a 58, a 83, and then a stinky 26. So, and there was really not, when I looked into the stats, there was really nothing that said, okay, this is why he scored a 26. He just couldn't find the pill. And we've seen that previously. He had a 29 before the finals came. So he's one that's going to be a pretty high risk player. And he is also a pretty high price tag as well. So it's a bit of a risky one, but absolutely could reap the rewards if he was to become that main distributor. And I think he's sort of the golden child there, taking over a few others. So he definitely could be one that you want to keep an eye on for me. The final one I'll speak about in terms of the backline taking that role is the boy that I threw in my December team reveal is Ryan Burton. I still generally believe that this guy is probably one of the more likely guys to take that role. He's priced at 68 or 69 if you round up, so 673k. So he is the cheapest of the lot. Only played the 3 games without Houston, and he averaged 85 in that period. So I'll show you those. So 89. Oh, sorry, where is he? So when Houston went down, he scored an 80, a 96, and an 81. Unfortunately, missing out on the semi-final against Hawks, so we'll never know what he scored there. Again, took a lot of kick-ins, so he already took a lot of the kick-ins for the season, as I showed you. He already had a big portion of that, so he may get a small bump in that, especially considering that he missed a big portion of the season with a foot injury. But is that going to be enough to really bump him up to a worthwhile pick of maybe an 80? Is maybe enough to warrant a pick, especially in a struggling area. You're not really paying a huge amount of overs for him. You're paying that 670k price tag. Probably is a safe enough area where that we can just lock in a D4 or something like that, a D4, D5, and then he increases his price enough to hold through to a decent period throughout the season, maybe until the mid-season buys. So he's definitely one that you want to keep an eye on. I expect him to be a 75 minimum averager, just with that small increase of kick-ins for his season. And I'll even show you his stats from the previous years. He has been an 80 guy only back in 2022. And even before that, we saw him be a 75er, a low 70s. It really just depends on what role he's got. And if he's out of the bad books with Kent, because that was another thing that was floating around, was that Kent really didn't like him, and that was the reason why he wasn't getting too many games previously and wasn't given the best role. To finish it off, we got 2 other guys. Lukosius, I'll quickly skim over because I realistically don't think he's going to be an option, but he is priced down at 61, so 627k. Realistically, I'm only wanting to see if he has a defensive role. If he's the one that takes over the Houston role again, then he could be an absolute fantasy scorer. We've seen sometimes when he was at Gold Coast, he did that halfback role. He's got a lethal kick, so he could be an easy replacement for them. It's just realistically, I think he's going to be in the forward line just with the stocks. With, like I said, Marshall going out with an injury for the season. You've only got Georgiadis, Finlayson, and Lord pretty much out there, and they've got Radigalia. That's probably a bit more depth. I doubt he'll probably play too many games. But I do expect Lukosius to play forward, so probably not one that we want to select. But if, like I said, if he goes back, definitely one could be another cheaper forward option for us to go along with the others that we have. And to finish it off, we'll finish off with Joe Berry's averages. So he averaged 66 in the under 18s, where he averaged 2.3 goals. Now that's very unrealistic in my view in the AFL particularly. So I'm only expecting 40s when it comes to what when he transitions. Uh, Even when you look at his talent league average, it was 69, so not much more, and his average was 1.9 goals. So again, very unrealistic. You're probably lucky to get 1 goal a game, so that really realistically drops it down to 40s, 40 to 50s sort of scores. But if he can get away with a big score, then definitely one that we can pick up at a later stage. I think he's going to get good amount of game time. If I show you the best 22, they have slotted him in at the small forward pocket, and that's probably realistic in my eyes. I realistically see Willie Rioli being the number 1 forward. Then you've got Sam Powell-Pepper coming back from injury. They've also recruited Joe Richards, who's more than likely going to take up another small forward role. I think that Joe Berry is just going to be given the license to go. Over the likes of a McEntee and a Darcy Bird-Jones may go back into the defensive line where we've seen him in his past life. So be interesting to see, and there's a lot going on at Port Adelaide, lots of names to keep a mention of, and it's just realistically that Dan Houston role in my eyes. It's just who's going to take that 95 average from him. Is it just going to be as simple as okay, 1 out, 1 in, they take all the points, or is it going to be an even distribution across the board? And unfortunately, with the more I look into it, the more my gut feeling tells me it's just going to get a nice even distribution between the Burtons, the Evans, and the Farrells of the world, where they may only receive a 5 or 10 point bump either here or there. I don't think it's going to be a massive, a 20-point upgrade for anyone particularly at this point in time. But preseason, still plenty of preseason to go ahead. We'll see how it develops. But that'll be it from me. Please, if you have any questions, go to QU. Links in my description. Ask any questions you got there. Besides that, please subscribe, and I'll catch you guys in the next one. Bye.